Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel, FPL Vincenzo, and today's pod is going to be looking solely at the wildcard. For me, one of the most important parts of my decision making going into game week 1 is to have a loose plan, I would say, not commit completely to a wildcard, but at least commit to a period of the season when I want to use the first wildcard, because with you wildcard in game week 4, game week 8, game week 12, for example, the teams you would pick in game week 1 in all of those 3 scenarios would be quite different, at least for me, because if you wildcard in game week 4, you're only looking at a 3-week window, and then you obviously wildcard out of it. Game week 8, you need to think a little bit more longer term. Game week 12, even more longer term than that. So maybe affects your risk taking in game week 1, maybe impacts the teams you target. You have to be a bit more considerate around transfers and things like that. So there's a couple of things I'll look at, and I'm going to call this next series. I've done some case studies already. I'm going to call this next series sort of game week 1 planning. And when we get the prices, we'll start looking at certain players there and planning around them, because that's also important for game week 1, working out how many premiums you want, etc., etc. But for me, having a wildcard plan, at least a loose one, is very important. And so that's the purpose of this. I don't think we need the prices, the player prices, to be able to make these sort of plans. The fixtures are enough, I think, normally to commit to a plan. So normally when I play FPL, and I've been playing since about 2007, so you're getting up to near 20 years now of playing FPL. And as has to be the case really with this sort of thing, you kind of get used to certain ways of playing. You become familiar with certain, I'll use the word rules, and you follow similar patterns most seasons. Now, in recent years, I've often tried to develop myself as an FPL manager and to make subtle changes to what I thought was the way I like to play, because I always feel like there's improvement. And I think I've certainly adapted more to the mindset now that FPL is becoming a different game year on year. And what worked in one season isn't guaranteed to work in another one. So it's nice having rules or sort of thought processes that you like to follow. But equally, I think you have to be adaptable. And I think it's probably the number one skill set of an FPL manager is to be adaptable, not focus so much on, oh, that worked last year, so I'll do that again. I do this every year and it's relatively successful. I'll do that again. And the wild card could fall into this category for me. So I've made it a habit, I would say, often for good reason, to really use my wild card before game week 6. Normally, it's between game week 4 and game week 6. Last year I played it game week 3, but normal best practice for me is between game week 4 and 6. And I have a logic and a reason for doing that, because by that point, particularly by game week 6, if I can hold on until game week 6, that anyone that's been late back to pre-season training, anyone that's been given an extended break, maybe isn't ready to start the season at the start of August, is normally back. We've had in the past like international tournaments that have ended in July. This year we've got the Club World Cup. There's always already talk that certain players won't have had long off this summer. Could certain managers say to those players, you've had a long season, you've just played all the way through the Club World Cup, go and have an extended holiday and don't worry about not featuring in game week 1, game week 2, that sort of thing. And by game week 3, they're kind of back in amongst the team again and getting minutes on the pitch. I don't think that's impossible for a team like Chelsea, who we already know have had a long season in the sense they've won a European competition. Now they're in the Club World Cup final. Their players won't have had much of a rest since sort of last August. So are they all going to be ready for game week 1? Or will Enzo Maresca say to some of them, yeah, you've had a long season, go and have 2-3 weeks off now. We'll see you back sort of first week, second week of August, and realistically it's September before they're really fit and firing to begin featuring regularly again. So by game week 6, anyone that's had an extended summer break is normally back and competing for a starting spot the same way anyone else would be. There's no sort of extra circumstances. We know sort of in more modern football, there's the summer transfer window that ends at the end of August. obviously right up until the deadline, there's opportunities for players to move. That could be new players joining the league. That could be players in FPL moving from one team to another and things like that. And by game week 6, you've got all of that info. So is there, for example, like last year we had Sepp van den Berg, priced up as a 4 million defender at Liverpool, probably perceived at the start of last year, 5th or 6th choice Liverpool centre-back, the game quite rightfully under those terms, priced him up as a 4 million defender. All of a sudden he gets a big money move to Brentford, and then initially he's in the team at right-back for various reasons, and then he's in the team at centre-back. He's now a 4 million playing defender, more so than Jacob Greaves, players like that. By waiting until game week 6 to the wild card, I've got that sort of level of insight. Hang on here, there's now a better 4 million defender than we thought we had. I want to be on that bandwagon immediately. I want him to be my 5th defender immediately. That's just one example of waiting for the transfer window. You've got, now that there's a block of time before there's going to be any more moves, any more loans, any more signings. The squad is settled. You've got all the insight in terms of what a squad's looking like. By game week 6, you've also managed to formulate some ideas on team tactics. Like coming into this year, we've got Brentford with a new manager. Thomas Frank's now playing for Tottenham. Are Liverpool going to set up differently with Florian Wirtz and Milos Kerkez in the team? Man City have made some new signings. How's that going to work? For me, it's quite important to look at eye tests and look at team shapes, how teams look in possession, out of position, which players are making which sort of runs repeatedly. I make a lot of my FPL choices based on these sorts of insights. So going into game week 1, a lot of this is unknown. You might learn a little bit from pre-season friendlies, but on the whole, it's only when the season really starts that you get sort of full insight into these things. Exactly how advanced will Aït-Nouri be at Man City? What role will Pedro Porro have under Thomas Frank? Will Brentford concede more goals now they've got a new manager? Is the perception he's going to be weaker than Frank known? So again, I know 5 weeks of data, 6 weeks of data isn't a load, and ideally you'd have more. But normally by game week 6, I've seen enough that I can formulate loose plans around teams and start identifying certain players within each team who look like returns are likely, certain players that look like returns are unlikely, and use that as a basis to pick my decisions. And finally, I say it's normally a chance to react to any early bandwagons at certain price points. We know realistically we're probably going to want a 4.5 million defender. There'll be a lot of them at the start of the season. Who's the best one going to be? Very easy to get that wrong. By game week 6, I think we kind of know who the best 4 million defender is, who the best 4.5 million defender is. Maybe we'll have good insights on how well strikers are doing coming into this season. Are they going to tweak the BPS system a little bit? We don't know. We'll have some evidence through 4 or 5 weeks if strikers are sort of getting 3 bonus points often still for scoring 1 goal, these sorts of things. So there's enough data again in terms of changes to the game in that way, in terms of things like BPS. Evidence that at each price point, which player looks like they're setting themselves up to be the best asset. And again, you obviously want to be on those bandwagons a lot quicker. The wildcard allows that rather than trying to make transfers 1 week at a time and maybe taking 4 or 5 weeks using sort of your regular free transfers to get to the team you actually want. How many points are you hemorrhaging in that time by sort of being patient and trying to get through it all with free transfers? The wildcard is the chance to adapt quickly. So for me, say that early wildcard, I have my full information. I know which players are fit and available. Everyone's back from their longer pre-season breaks. No more transfers can be made. The transfer window's shut. We've got an idea of team tactics, and we've got an idea of any rules to the game, the impact that's having on points, and sort of which players are already standing out as being the best at their price point. And the earlier I think I can use all that insight to my best ability, I think is a benefit. So for me, that's normally between game week 4 and game week 6. So that's become a general rule for me. But then we come to this year. And I think we need to be open-minded and adaptable and accept that circumstances are different. One of the first things I think you're trained to look for, having played FPL for so long, is big fixture shifts. And quite clearly this year, the biggest fixture shift in the first half of the season is game week 13. Up on the screen right now is 7 game weeks between game week 13 and game week 19. Instantly, you see repeated fixtures in game week 15 and game week 19. So teams have the same opponent in both of those 2 game weeks. And what do these fixtures show us in this 7-week block? Well, for Liverpool, for Man City and for Newcastle, in this 7-week block, all 3 of those teams play the 3 promoted teams 3 times. Now, this doesn't guarantee right now that the 3 promoted teams will instantly be the 3 worst. Obviously, the last 2 seasons of data, the 3 promoted teams have gone straight back down. I did a pod about that recently around sort of Sunderland expectations in Southampton comparisons. So I think based on what we know right now, we have to assume that the 3 promoted teams are the teams to target again until we get some evidence suggesting otherwise. And if you look at this run, Liverpool, Man City and Newcastle are the main beneficiaries. They've got, say, 9 matches with promoted teams between them in 7 game weeks, which is a pretty high volume, I think. On top of that, we don't really have any what you'd call hard games. We're obviously used to colour coding on fixture tickers and what red fixtures look like. None of them have any of them. Liverpool, Man City and Newcastle don't play each other across this 7 game week block. They also don't play Arsenal in this 7 game week block. And in fact, in that 7 game weeks between Liverpool, Man City and Newcastle, they've actually only got 1 fixture where they take on one of last year's top 6. And that's Newcastle playing at home to Chelsea in game week 17. So you look at this run of 7 game weeks and you think, if I could have 9 players from Liverpool, Man City and Newcastle for 7 game weeks, obviously there might be an injury or a red card or something in there. But you look at it and think, I wouldn't need to make a transfer here. I could just play those 9 players in every game week. I get a higher volume of games against the weaker teams in the league. And even if it's not the weaker teams in the league, the fixtures aren't the worst. You look at it, games like away to Fulham, away to West Ham, home to Brighton, away to Everton. Normally, if you've got players from one of the better teams in the league chasing a Champions League spot, they're the sort of fixtures you'd happily play your players if they were away to Everton, away to West Ham, home to Brighton. So really strong appeal here to have 9 players from Liverpool, Man City and Newcastle. Obvious risk, or the obvious problem with that, is that these players will likely be expensive. There might be a few bargains in there. Maybe Lewis Hall will be cheap. Anthony Elanga could be working out really well for Newcastle and be priced quite low. Maybe Man City will have someone who's not crazy priced. Maybe Reinders is looking very good at that point. It might be like 6 million mid or something. Who knows? But there will be some options, I think, at a more affordable price. But let's be fair, the players we're going to want here, the Salahs, the Haalands, the Isaks, they're all going to be expensive. Probably the 3 most expensive players in the game would be my initial thought. And to have them, and having all 3 of them is going to be very hard to afford. Not impossible, depending on who else you have. But you need a collection of sort of weaker teams with cheaper FPL assets that sort of balance well with them. And we have that as well between game week 13 and game week 19. We've got Crystal Palace, who play Burnley and Leeds. So 2 promoted teams in that run, albeit both away. We have Brentford, who also have Burnley and Leeds, albeit both at home. We have Bournemouth, who have Sunderland away and Burnley at home. And we have Brighton, who have Sunderland at home, and a couple of also quite attractive games with West Ham. So, again, I'm not guaranteeing it's going to be possible here to have 9 assets from Liverpool, Man City and Newcastle and pad that out with Crystal Palace, Brentford, Brighton and Bournemouth players. But there's a chance here that something is possible if you mix a collection with those 4 sort of, shall we say, mid-table to bottom half teams in with the 3 sort of Champions League chasing teams. So you'd feel like from these 7 teams, Liverpool, Man City, Newcastle, Crystal Palace, Brentford, Brighton and Bournemouth, you could probably have quite a tidy squad here of maybe at least 13 players that in any given week in this period, you'll have a strong starting 11. Now, maybe game week 18 being the exception here because none of the 7 teams actually play a promoted team in that week, which is maybe slightly unusual. So game week 18, maybe not the strongest, but the other 6 here, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 19, is a really strong possibility to target the promoted teams and in an affordable way. So you may have to sacrifice something. Maybe you could use the early part of the season with a real focus on team value. And maybe if you do that and jump on bandwagons early and chase the price rises and things, maybe you could get to a point sort of preparing for this block of games where your team value could be significantly more. And that might allow you 1 extra player from the big 3 or 2 extra players from the big 3 rather than having to settle for an extra player from a Crystal Palace or a Bournemouth, for example. So I say another reason why I like to be clear at the start what I'm targeting, because it might affect my gameplay through the first block. So if I commit to this now, and how do I want to approach game week 13? then I might need to play a certain way in the first 8 game weeks with a big focus around team value to then afford myself a better team for this period. The one thing I wanted to raise, and I've highlighted on Twitter before I recorded this pod, that I wasn't going to propose a wild card that fitted in with what others have suggested. Now, I know that other pods have probably already highlighted game week 13 as a possible wild card, so I'm not going to. Obviously, game week 13, we need to have a squad we're happy with. And for many people, that will mean wildcarding in game week 13 for the full insight. And I can be on board with that. But what happens before game week 13? So directly before that, we have an international break between game week 12 and game week 13. But if you look at the fixtures of the team that we want from game week 13 onwards, they're not incredible. Liverpool with Brentford away, Villa at home, Man City away, Forest at home. So game week 12 is okay, at least for Liverpool. City and Newcastle are not great because they play each other in game week 12 at St James's Park. Before that, the fixtures aren't too bad. Newcastle have Fulham at home, West Ham away, Brentford away. Fine 3 fixtures there before Man City at home. And for City, it's Villa away, Bournemouth at home, Liverpool at home. Not so good. Again, it's not incredible for Crystal Palace, Brentford, Brighton or Bournemouth either, albeit there's some okay fixtures within there. Brighton have Leeds at home, for example. If you look at that block before game week 13, particularly from the period of game week 9, there's 3 other teams that I think we're going to want. Arsenal being one. Between game week 9 and game week 12, that 4-week period, they have Burnley away and Sunderland away in game week 10 and game week 11. West Ham have Leeds away and Burnley at home in game week 9 and game week 11. And Chelsea have Sunderland at home in 9 and Burnley away in 12. Also, Wolves at home in 11 could be considered. Might be a good fixture. I think the interesting point for me here is game week 12. Because I say for the teams we're going to want in game week 13, it's not horrible. Liverpool at home to Forest. You wouldn't mind moving into Liverpool a week early there. I know Forest did quite well this year, but I think Liverpool, you'd like to think, should win that game. Man City, Newcastle is a problem, I accept. But say we have got 3 substitutes each game week. So if we wanted to go into game week 12 with maybe 2 Man City and 1 Newcastle play, you could bench them all, or just play the Newcastle ones against City, or play Haaland at St James's if you wanted him, for example. The 4 sort of teams, the mid-table teams with good games. You've got Palace away to Wolves, not bad. Brentford away to Brighton, a bit meh, but not horrible. Obviously, Brighton at home to Brentford, which is better. And then Bournemouth at home to West Ham, which is quite good. So, of the 7 teams we want, I would say 4 of them are pretty good. Liverpool, Palace, Brighton, Bournemouth. Brentford are okay away to Brighton. Newcastle probably okay at home to Man City. Man City away to Newcastle, not so good. But there's still enough there to make game week 12 wildcard appealing, and getting those players in a week early. You could still have quite a good team. And it's particularly notable because of those 3 teams you're going to want in advance of that. Arsenal, in game week 12, they're at home to Tottenham. West Ham, in game week 12, they're away to Bournemouth. And Chelsea, in game week 12, they're away to Burnley. So if you look at Arsenal, Liverpool assets, you'd imagine will be similarly priced. Obviously, last year's top 2 in the league. If you played a wild card a week early, if you got 3 Arsenal players in game week 9, to play Crystal Palace at home and then the 2 away games with Burnley and Sunderland, by playing the wild card in game week 12, you're sacrificing those 3 Arsenal players for the North London derby at home to Tottenham. But you're getting 3 Liverpool players instead who are at home to Nottingham Forest. Again, people may have different views on this. We don't have evidence yet on how Tottenham are going to play under Thomas Frank. You'd think they'll be better defensively than they were previously. I think it's a fair argument, at least, to say you'd be more than happy to have 3 Liverpool players at the expense of 3 Arsenal players. So you don't lose out there. West Ham being the sort of mid-table to bottom half team or away to Bournemouth, you sacrifice that and you get Crystal Palace away to Wolves, arguably a bit better. Or Bournemouth at home to West Ham instead, which is better. Or Brighton at home to Brentford, which is maybe a bit better. So for the second team in this run, again, you get a gain. Fair enough, Chelsea, you'd probably rather have away to Burnley than having Newcastle players instead at home to Man City. But the point being, I think that if you look at what team you're likely to, or what the template's likely to be in game week 12, so those players from Arsenal, West Ham, Chelsea, and a sprinkling of others, if you look at that team through 9, 10, and 11, you give it up in game week 12, I haven't run this through any sort of algorithm or anything, but my thought process would be that the expected points you're going to get from that template in game week 12 will be fairly similar to what the game week 13 template would be if you played it a week early. So if you played your triple Liverpool at Forest, maybe a couple of Newcastle at home to Man City, a sprinkling of Palace, Brentford, Brighton, Bournemouth, those expected points for game week 12 will be similar to what the template would have been if you just wait an extra week to wildcard in 13. So I don't think you actually lose a lot of points in game week 12 by playing that wildcard a week early. You could lose an incredible amount in team value, though, by waiting until game week 13, because other pods naturally nearer game week 13 will start highlighting the appeal of the fixtures from that point onwards. That run from 13 to 19 is incredible for 7 teams, particularly 3 big teams. So it's not going to go unnoticed by content creators. There'll be a lot of content around it. I imagine around game week 9, game week 10, you need to start making plans for game week 13, roll transfers, save the wild card, etc., etc. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon here to realise what the template squad might look like in game week 13, particularly the bulk of it. So if people are trying to get there in free transfers or wait until game week 13, it's quite a good chance between sort of game week 11 and game week 13 that lots of those template players from game week 13 onwards are likely to get price rises. We had it last year with like Brian Mbeumo, someone like that. I think it was game week 6, maybe game week 8, Brentford's fixtures massively improved. They had a really good run of like 10, 15 game weeks. Within the first week or two of that run, his price had gone up 0.3, 0.4. By me getting him on my wild card 2 or 3 weeks early, I paid actually quite a lot cheaper for him. If you look at this run from game week 13 and think there could be 5 or 6 sort of examples of players that fit that Mbeumo mode, maybe at that point, people will start moving to a Wirtz or a Gakpo or a Kirkez. For Man City, they might start looking to funnel money into Aït-Nouri or funnel money into, I don't know, Marmoush or someone like that. Then Newcastle, they want to triple up, so suddenly Elanga's popular, Lewis Hall's popular. They wasn't in the block before that. I say then you've got people that didn't start with Daniel Munoz who suddenly want him now. Maybe Bournemouth, the Semenyo or someone like that, Evan Nilsson even as the 8th attacker, things like this. Before you know it, if you look at what the prices of this collection of players will be in game week 11, by game week 13, when you activate your wild card, you might spend an extra $1 million on the same group of players because all of them have gone up 0.1, maybe in some cases 0.2 in that 2-week block before. So for me, I much prefer the idea here loosely of wildcarding in game week 12. As I say, I don't think the expected points will be any less than playing through with your game week 11 team versus what you want in game week 13. But I think the price difference for that same group of players will be considerably less because these players are bound to be popular. When managers are bringing them in, prices go up, etc., etc. Equally, you've got the flip side of that. If you're on the template of game week 11 and people are starting to phase off of that towards what the game week 13 template will be, people will be making similar transfers, selling someone like Saka for, I don't know, Salah, or selling Gyökeres if he's at Arsenal by that point to Isak, or selling Jared Bowen for Ismail Assar. I don't know, any of these sorts of moves. All of a sudden, you've got the players that you initially had, the Gyökeres and the Sars, Gyökeres and the Bowens all dropping in price. I mean, you've got the Sars and the Isaks going up in price. So each one of those moves, you're losing 0.1 one end, gaining 0.1 the other end. And to say that the price difference could be substantial by game week 13 just by waiting a week. So for me in the past, I've often looked at what will be a popular week for others to wildcard, or look at a block of fixtures and can sort of realise in advance the sort of transfers managers are going to want or what 3 or 4 players managers are actually going to gravitate to. I often have made a habit of trying to move to them a week or 2 early, even if the fixtures are not perfect. I'd rather have them in place for a more affordable price than get them when you actually want them and pay 0.2, 0.3 extra for the privileges of basically just delaying it for the full insight. I say in this particular block that we could be looking at 7, 8 player swings here of template players that people are going to want to get to. So it's more than possible before sort of going into game week 12 for those wildcarding in game week 13. They may only have 1 Liverpool player, no Man City players, maybe 1 Newcastle, 1 Palace or something. From those big 7 teams, they may only have already owned 4 or 5 players, when in reality from game week 13, they want 12 or 13 of them. Those other 8 are all going to shoot up in price. We can do something about that by just getting them in early. So just as a sort of a takeaway for this pod, my thought process right now is the thought process for me right now is that I need to have one eye quite sternly on game week 13. Not so much to the point of pick a team with game week 13 in mind and know my exact wildcard in game week 13. I'm not saying be that organised and plan that far ahead, because I think 12 weeks in advance is early. But at least have it in your mind, a rough outline of what you expect your wildcard to be, what teams you want covered, sort of what sort of players you're likely to have in the run-up to that block. Obviously, this is flexible. If in game week 4 we've got big problems in our squad, we've got 3 non-players, we've got injuries, etc., etc., we have to play the wild card early. This plan has to change. Game week 13 is still significant, but we'll have to reroute and find the best alternative way to cover this off. But as of right now, I think I want to play through the first couple of weeks with quite a basic team. I want to make sure by game week 9 I'm in a position to own Arsenal and Chelsea players for their great fixtures against the newly promoted teams, sprinkling of West Ham, who are a bit more ownable from game week 1. Got Sunderland from the start, so the likes of Bowen and Wan-Bissaka I think are quite high on my shortlist for game week 1. So I'll run those through into sort of game week 12. If I can, early in the season, try and boost my team value, because I think there's going to be quite a lot of expensive players that we've got to want from that run for game week 13 to game week 20. It's not an insignificant block of fake games either, is it? It's 7 game weeks. A lot of points up for grabs in those 7 game weeks. It's not like we're trying to prioritise moves for a small block. This is 7 game weeks. So I think it is important to have a good spread from Liverpool, Newcastle, Man City. I'm not saying definitely own 9, but I certainly think you're probably going to want 6 minimum, maybe even 7. That needs to be afforded and costed. There's ways to do it with using the cheaper teams. Equally, another way to do it is to get your team value high at the start. It's not something I always massively focus on from the start, but this year, again, being adaptable, I think I'd be keener this year to be fairly proactive early on with transfers and chase price rises a bit more. Because for me, the first 12 weeks is now, or the first 11 weeks really, is about consolidating, getting a steady rank. Somewhere in the top million is probably fine. If I can be the top 500,000, top 100,000, even better. But the sort of high upside, high ceiling period here is at 13 to 20. We know who the big teams are. We know there's quite a lot of mismatches. There's opportunity there for substantial wins, higher volume of clean sheets, all these sorts of things. We know it only takes 2 or 3 good weeks in a row and you make significant ground. You've got an opportunity here over basically 7 weeks to make significant ground. Nothing stupid at the start of the season. Well, don't get yourself caught at 4 million early on by taking unnecessary risks. Start steady. Try and get price rises and increase your team value while you can. Set yourself up with Arsenal and Chelsea, I think, right now for game week 9. Play the wild card in 12, but basically pick the wild card 13 team a week early and hopefully save some budget there. In doing so, allow yourself the chance to get 1 or 2 extra better players in. And then you're off to the races, and then you're in the lap of the gods, obviously, then in game week 13. That is where luck comes into it, right? You pick good players with good fixtures. Hopefully you've got more of them than everyone else because you've bought them a bit cheaper and you've assembled a better team value early on. And then you hopefully reap the rewards from that, and you go into the second half of the season sort of in a really strong position. So there's my initial thoughts for the first block. I don't see much of this changing on account of the prices coming out. We imagine it might come out sort of this week. But if it doesn't, it's fine. I think later the game launches, the better personally, but that can be a discussion for another pod. But for now, yeah, thanks for listening. Hope you found that fairly insightful in terms of how my mind works and how I strategize through the first part of the season. And so I think the one takeaway for listeners here is just be open-minded, be adaptable. If you've played the game for quite a long time, or you've even played it for a couple of years, but certain things have worked for you, don't just fall back on those sort of rules that they're definitely going to work again. I think game obviously changed a lot last year with the launch of the assistant manager chip, with the way the BPS system changed, other things like that. There'll be, again, we've obviously got quite a lot of teams from the Premier League playing in Europe this year. We know some sort of carnage we had at the back end of last year because of loads of English teams still being involved in Europe and the impact they maybe had on the strength of a late bench boost and things like that. So the last season adapted as it went. There's some things we can learn from. I think particularly those fixtures, and I'll do a pod on that before the season starts around what that means for the use of other chips, things like bench boost. And people have already asked me, will I consider bench boost game week 1? So I'll do a pod on that, and that will all be part of that pod. But yeah, just be adaptable. Don't just fall back on methods that you've done before, because each season's different, and I think there's plenty of learnings for this year. So for now, thanks for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another pod to help with our game week 1 planning. Cheers all.